Welcome back to Down Parenting, your English-speaking parenting podcast in the Netherlands. I'm your host, Eva, and today we're leaning into one of the most universal yet deeply personal experiences we share as parents, the birth story. Last season, we were honoured to hold space for 4 women as they shared their birth stories, each one unique, powerful, and deeply personal. And with every story, we've seen something beautiful happen. What was once whispered in private, sometimes carried in an exhausted or even heartbroken heart, is now being spoken out loud. Birth stories are moving out of the shadows and into the open, onto podcasts, into articles, Substacks, and even online communities. They've been shared with honesty and courage, and in that sharing, parents everywhere are discovering something vital. We are not alone in this. For many of us, coming from different cultures and countries, we arrive in the Netherlands with our own ideas of what birth looks like, what's expected, what's acceptable, and what's normal back home. But here we are, in a whole new country, and suddenly we're part of a different club altogether. We're all navigating the Dutch system, sometimes without really knowing what to expect. And that in itself is a whole other layer of an experience. And sharing these stories takes courage. That word courage, it comes from the Latin cor, meaning heart. Courage originally meant to speak one's mind by telling one's heart. And that's exactly what happens when a woman shares her birth story. It's raw, it's honest, and it's one from the heart. Every story, whether joyful, challenging, or somewhere in between, it's valid. Every story is honoured here. And research actually backs this all up. Studies show that sharing birth stories helps with emotional processing, reduces feelings of isolation, and can even support mental health by creating a narrative out of such a huge life event. It builds communities, it reduces fears, and it even gives us a sense of agency. In fact, storytelling has been shown to help women feel validated, supported, and connected. Something we all need in this parenting village we're building together. So today, we're welcoming Ellen and her doula, who is a pretty familiar voice on this podcast, Elena Standring, to share Ellen's birth story. It's light, it's fun, it's real, and we hope you'll nod along, maybe even tear up a little or laugh, but most of all, feel connected to the community of parents here in the Netherlands. Let's jump in. Ladies, welcome.
Hello, good morning.
Hello, good morning.
Hi, thank you so much for joining. So Ellen, this is going to be your story. So can you take us back to the beginning? What were your thoughts and feelings during pregnancy as you started preparing for birth here in the Netherlands?
Yes, I would be happy to share. And thank you so much for making the space for us to have conversations like this. I am one of the people that listen to not only the birth stories that you just referenced from past seasons, but many, many of the episodes, which was part of my preparation. So it just feels really full circle to be here sharing as well. And I also just wanted to say before I dive in and share my story that I know birth stories can be, as you said, so personal. And I just want everyone to know that I appreciate wherever you're coming from in your own story. And I don't mean to imply by sharing this that there's a right way or that there's something that I, deserved more or less or anything else just because of the way it went. And so I just think it's good to throw that out there. And I also simultaneously think there are things that I experienced prior to birth that allowed it to be what it was and as positive as it was. So I wanted to share those as well, because I think there's some value in that. So with that said, just thought I would zoom out super quickly before I tell the story itself and just give a little context for my life in the Netherlands and how I came to be working with Elena. So, first of all, we moved here almost 4 years ago now. And at that time, we weren't ready to start a family. So I wasn't really thinking about what it would mean to be in a different country. But it's so interesting to me now and kind of magical the way that we landed in this system that is so different from the way birth is approached and seen in the US, which is where I'm from. And in fact, I think that, the nature of birth here and the philosophy of it, which we'll get into, is part of what enabled me to have this story. I really don't think that the story would be the same if I was still home in the States. And so I think that's just worth noting as a part of my own journey, that this landing in how birth is done here and in pregnancy was such a part of my process for feeling comfortable and also part of why we brought in Elena, one of the many reasons. So I just wanted to mention that. The other thing that was kind of unique in some ways, even before pregnancy, was that I got connected to this community through the labor department, which many of your listeners might know, of people who work in the birth and pregnancy and prenatal, postnatal parenting space. And I got linked in just because I was a fellow entrepreneur who was offering some workshops and things. But it was just one of those serendipitous things where, because of being introduced to this group, I ended up making friends with a lot of other women who were working in this space. And they were doing things that I had never even known about. They were doing hypnobirthing, and they were doulas, and they were, nutritionists for prenatal like specialty and all this stuff that I just hadn't been in that part of life yet. And so through exposure to that, I got a real taste of what this world was about, and also how supported it could feel, I guess you could say. Like it's something that can be so lonely and so new when you're stepping into it. But I actually felt like I had this network of folks who were experts and who are also mothers and had been through this journey as international parents in the Netherlands. So that was just a really sort of special thing. It's also the reason that I met Elena, because she was offering a workshop on how to navigate the birthscape in the Netherlands, which you also have shared here on the podcast. And I think going to that, even a few years before we had my daughter, we weren't pregnant. We were just sort of like trying to get our heads around, would we be comfortable doing that here? We went to her workshop. I dragged my husband to her workshop. And yeah, it just instantly set me at ease and made me realize, okay, yes, this could be a place where I would feel comfortable, even though I'm so far from family, even though the system is different. And so that was a big moment for us. Also, a moment where I realized what important support doulas provide, just from her presence, the way she took us through it, even though it wasn't a doula session. It helped me realize, okay, especially if I'm going to be in a place where, my family isn't from here, even if they were to be present for it, I would want someone who's of this system, familiar with it, and also shares my international roots and all the things, right? So there was something really sparking there that I hadn't expected either. I'd never thought about working with a doula in previous years of my life, right? And the other thing that was really striking in starting to open this door was that I started to realize my own fears about birth and pregnancy. And I had always been told, by family or by friends or by my school system or the hospital system that like I was kind of, I don't know if weak is the right word, but sensitive. And I used to pass out when I would have a blood draw and like these various things, right? So I have some experiences, especially in the medical system, which were very negative. And I thought of myself as someone who was really volatile in this kind of a space. And so when I had this workshop with Elena, just talking about the birthscape overall, I had this thought. I walked away, and one of the things I was worried about was, would I pass out when I gave birth? Like, what happens if I pass out when I give birth? I'm not pregnant. I'm not in it yet. I've just have this fear. And she was so kind and willing to do a consult with me about this thing that was kind of obscure seemingly. And even just in having that conversation with her before my pregnancy, before we started working together formally, I had so much peace, not only about like that specific instance of having a blood draw and passing out, and that has resolved itself really beautifully in a way I never expected, a separate whole story, but also that I felt really comfortable in stepping into the space of this journey. And I felt like, oh, I can do this. And there's nothing fundamentally wrong with me that's going to make this really hard or miserable or, just not the way it's supposed to go. Right. And so that I think was also a big turning point, even though it really didn't have to do with pregnancy directly. And that was a big thing for me. And the other thing too, just to mention, is that I'm a coach by profession. And at the time, I was also working with a really wonderful somatic coach and a therapist. My therapist was here in Amsterdam. My coach happens to be in San Francisco. But I had this wonderful team, and they were helping me to just build confidence and trust in my own body, which is something that I had never really felt strong in. I'd always been like more of a head level person, like intellectual, smart, quote unquote, like capable, high achieving, very type A, oldest sister, all the things, right? But I never had a real deep connection to my physical body and also to my emotional domain. And I just really was craving that over the years leading up to when I got pregnant. And so working with those two women, as well as previous therapists and as well as Elena, really, I think, put me in the right place for me be pregnant and to become a mom, because I don't think that I would have had the same experience with the birth I'm going to share with you if I had not had that preparation and connection to myself and that trust in myself and my body. So that was, for me, very, very fundamental in just getting to where we got to. So
if I may interject, I'm going to let you take a breath a moment, Ellen, and just gently suggest what a beautiful example of matrescence this is. That way before the kind of decision together that, okay, now we're ready to conceive, you were making this beautiful, fertile space of readiness and preparation and forethought and looking to really kind of strengthen and galvanize your connection with yourself so that you were really ready to welcome a baby. It's it touches me so deeply each time we discuss it. It's like a textbook example, right?
Yeah. So then when we did get pregnant, one of the first things I did was reach out to Elena because I really wanted to make sure we could work together. By that point, I was pretty determined. And I knew that part of the team that I wanted to assemble in terms of like my doula, my midwife, Kramzor, also, it was really important that my husband felt comfortable with them too, because he's also an expat. He's also from the States. And he's not someone that particularly feels comfortable in like a medical setting or with blood and those types of things. So I knew that I wanted to bring folks together and create sort of a preparation that he could be part of and that he would feel as supported as he could once we got to the day. So just to sort of mention that, and that was a big part of the work we did with Elena as well, was just to make sure that he felt ready and knew what he could be doing, and also knew when it was okay to step away or what she could do to support me in moments when it felt too intense or whatever it may be. And then in terms of, the pregnancy, I decided to work with Verloskundige NLN 101, which was a really wonderful experience as well. I sought them out because I, first of all, just felt really comfortable with their website. They were really positive in how they spoke about working with expats, with international parents as well. It wasn't just sort of accidental Google Translate and you just see their website. Like they really make an effort to make it in English as well as Dutch and to encourage you to join them. So that felt really good, as well as, ironically, they had the option to do your blood work at the practice, which for me, as someone who was really uncomfortable with blood work and hospitals, I felt like, okay, well, maybe this will just take the edge off a little bit. I know pregnancy is going to come with all of these quote unquote scary things that I don't enjoy. It just leaves my American medicalized pregnancy view. So maybe I'll take the edge off. I'll be part of this practice that at least makes it feel a bit more homey and comfortable. You'll be with your midwives. They're not rushing you, whatever. So that was really wonderful. And as well as just their overall demeanor and the way that they run things, which was so positive. They have a program called Centering Pregnancy, which is offered in a couple other practices as well in the Netherlands. I think Amsterdam also offers it. But basically, they bring together a group of women, all due within about 6 weeks of each other, or even shorter time sometimes. And you go through your prenatal preparations together. So you have still time privately with the midwife to do your appointments, but you get to learn more about pregnancy and about birth and about postpartum with a group who is going through something exactly the same as you. You get to make friends with those people. Your partners also come join a couple of the sessions. So that was a really beautiful thing as well, just for us to not have our original community of origin where we were from, to really get to make friends with people in that same moment. And we still get together with them, and that's really positive. We also did some preparation with Prep to Parent course, which gave us some more support, also helped my husband to meet some more dads, potential dads, partners. And so that was a really nice part of our journey too. But I think overall, I was pretty fortunate in my pregnancy from a physical standpoint. It was pretty smooth. I had some pretty bad morning sickness, I guess you can call it, in the first trimester. But then the second was sort of the stereotypical, like, nicer one and more enjoyable. And I felt really good. The second half of the pregnancy was a little bit of a bummer because I had gestational diabetes, which was not something that I anticipated and was a bit knocked off my stride by, just because it was such a big adjustment to figure out how to change your eating while you were pregnant, while you were hungry all the time, like your blood sugar was going up and down. So that was a challenging thing. I wouldn't say it was wholly negative, but I do think that it was a tough part. And in fact, because I couldn't quite figure out how to get the numbers to where they needed to be on my own, I ended up going into like the hospital level care for a couple of weeks. And so I worked with OVG, which I have to admit prior to, I was a bit nervous about too, because again, I'm just not big on hospitals. And I was so comfortable with my midwives that I was really heartbroken to be told, like, you need to be in the hospital's care and we're not sure if you're going to be able to give birth with us, exactly, et cetera. So when I went to OVG, I was really nervous that this was going to change the whole outcome of my birth story and journey. And Elena was, sort of helping walk me through, like, how could that impact your birth plan, et cetera? Because if you're in the hospital's care, you can't give birth at home, you can't give birth at a birthing center, and there's just different choices that you're able to make. And I that was the hiccup for me, to be honest. That was the hardest part, was the unknown of whether I was going to have my own agency in like the full scope of choices, right? And I knew that working with a doula, I would have a chance to make the birth as much the way I wanted it as possible. But I didn't like the idea that if I was in the hospital's care, that some of those fundamental options would have been taken away. So that was a really challenging part. However, we were able to get the diabetes numbers to where they needed to be. They have a specialist team that they hooked me up with. I was, reporting on an app 3 times a day, pricking my finger, all that, it was not fun, but it did get me where I needed to go without having to take insulin and any like major disruption. It was just kind of miserable for a little while, especially towards the end. So in any case, I was able to, we call it like graduate back to the midwife about 4 weeks before my due date when I went into OVG, and I had sort of passed their checks along the way. I got extra ultrasounds to make sure the baby was okay. And I actually had to fight a little bit to like get sent back down, quote unquote, to the level of care of the midwife, because I think it's just more typical once you're in the hospital system, you just sort of stay there. They don't really ask a lot of questions. But I was quite adamant, like, I was told before I came into their system that this was an option, at least like entertain it and tell me whether you think I'm okay. And so they were in the end willing to transfer me back to the first line of care. And I think, again, my preparation with Elena, with the midwives, like really gave me that sense of confidence to ask for that and advocate for that, because I am someone who tends to be a bit deferential to authority, or just more likely to say, oh, okay, I guess if that's what you think, then what can I possibly say, right? But in this case, I felt really strongly. And I think, to her point around matrescence, like I was sort of starting to step into that more like lioness persona of like, this is my body and my baby and our journey, and I'm at least going to fight for her and for me. So that was also a big moment to sort of say, even though I could have easily stayed and had more certainty, let's say, and where I would give birth and all these things that can be really stressful here in the Netherlands, I wanted to have it be on my terms. Yeah, other than those pieces, my pregnancy was pretty smooth, and I enjoyed it some of the time. I mean, it was rough other times. I was able to exercise, I was able to move around, and I really enjoyed that last month when you get your 4 weeks before your due date off from work. That was such a huge gift to me, even as a self-employed person, that the government says, this is when your leave payments start. So this is when you're going to start being off. I don't think I ever would have done that, especially not in the States, where, first of all, you don't get paid as a self-employed person for any leave, but you also are never encouraged to stop working before your baby comes. I think many people I know worked until the day they went into labor. So for me to have 4 weeks just felt so luxurious. And I got to sit there and like throw on the fireplace on my, my TV, because I don't have a real one. So I had to put the YouTube, music and fireplace thing. And I was baking and cooking and just like stuffing my freezer full of stuff, so that by the time my due date came and everything else started to happen, I really felt very grounded and very ready. And that was just such a gift. It was also Christmas time, so it was really cozy. I didn't mind like not being outside much. I was ready to just like settle a bit.
Well, that sounds like you really prepped yourself more than most people I've actually ever spoken to. But now about the moment things began. Tell us a bit about the start of your labor. How did you know it was actually happening, and what were those first few hours like?
Yeah, it's funny you ask, how did you know it was actually happening? Because I think so many of us have these moments leading up to it where we wonder, like, is this it? And what's happening? I'd had so many sensations and like stronger kicks and pushes and things in the days leading up, but it wasn't ever like trackable. It wasn't a contraction that went up and down. And so I think what had happened was the evening that I went into labor, we borrowed my neighbor's car from her. She was going away on holiday for the Christmas holidays. She said, I know you're stressed that you don't have a car to get to the birthing center. So, why don't you use my car? So that was almost like, I think my body was like holding on to that a little bit because I knew my husband really wanted to have that in place. And so we were 3 days past the due date at this point. We take my neighbor to her mom's and we bring her car back and park it outside. We get home, we play like a little board game. And like an hour later, I went into labor. And I think there was just something subconscious about like, I was holding on. And then as soon as we had that last little seemingly silly piece in place, I just kind of let go. I don't think I was conscious of it, but in looking back, I think that's part of what happened. So the contractions started around 10:30 in the evening. And I was just in my bedroom by myself. My husband was watching TV out in the other room. He knew, there aren't very many nights left. He can sort of just do this, watch a movie, whatever. So I just sat in our room by myself for like an hour. I didn't even tell him that it had started. I was just like, I need to sit here and see what's happening in my body and see, they always say, oh, it comes and goes and it starts and stops. And, this might not be really it, whatever. I was like, I'm just going to sit here with myself and just sort of feel it and experience it and be in awe of it a little bit. And I just started tracking, how long it was lasting. And after about an hour, I was like, okay, I think this is really happening. Like, this is not just some, big kicks or whatever I had felt earlier in the day. Yeah. So then I went out to him and I said, I think this is happening, right? Like this is starting. And yeah, it all sort of went from there.
You now know that you're in labor.
Yes.
When does the wonderful Elena get contacted? Because people who are never really sure when you're actually meant to reach out to a doula or your midwife, and it kind of gets quite mixed up.
Yeah. And that's a really good point. And I think this is part of our story in the end is about when we timed the calls and everything else. But Elena was the first one we called because my contractions hadn't yet gotten to the point where they were like, oh, you called the midwife officially, right? So we reached out to her and we said, this is starting to happen. We think this is for real. And so that was probably around midnight, 11:30 at night. And she just was very, very, congratulatory, very encouraging and just said, oh, why don't you go get in a hot shower, see how things go, see if things slow down or keep going and just sort of, tune into your body a little bit and then check in with me. And so, yeah, that was our first step, was just to like sort of take a step back and jump in the shower. And one of the things I had heard a lot was like, if you get in the shower and then it stops, then it's not real labor. So we were sort of still in this like testing phase of, is this going to continue or is it going to be kind of start and stop for several days, right? So we got out of the shower and it was still going strong. And we were starting to get to the point of it being like to the right amount of time apart where you can call the midwife. So that was our next call, was we called the midwife. And yeah, we had that conversation around like how I was doing. And she kind of talks you through to see if you're still conversational and how far along you might be, all those sort of things to gauge where you're at. And she had said to me at that point, it sounds like you're still pretty conversational. Maybe just give yourself a little more time to get into it more. And, call me back whenever. I'll happily come now, but my sense is that you still have a little ways to go. So why don't you two just sort of, if you're comfortable with it, stay in your own little bubble, do your thing, and then call me back in an hour or like, when it feels like you need more support.
So as the labor is actually unfolding, what moments are actually standing out to you the most vividly? If it's either physically or emotionally or just even in the environment around you, what are you actually kind of sensing or feeling?
Yeah. I think the overwhelming feeling that I remember was feeling both like excited and pretty calm. Like I was still shocked. Like I knew going into it that I thought I felt calm. And I was like, okay, this is weird. I always expected to be afraid or like really jittery. And there were some jitters, but I really did feel calm. Like I wasn't afraid. And I think that was so striking just because of so much of what you hear about birth and how all the stories that are told in movies and whatever are steeped in this like fear and screaming and, and I just had this sense of like, I am okay. Like we are okay. we are supported. We have this team. And I really believed that in the moment. And the wild thing is that my husband was very much on that same page, right? And like, he also had his own stuff and like his own body to contend with. And like, I think the part that was so striking was like, in those couple of hours, ended up being a couple of hours between when we called the midwife and Elena and when we called them back and they actually came, because we just dropped into this like other universe. Like we were just in our zone. We literally were like in our closet because I just had this pull to like be in my bedroom, and I wanted to like kind of micro nap between contractions, which sounds wild, but it actually did work for me. Like I would have the contraction and then I would just lay down on my pregnancy pillow and like just almost like be unconscious for like 30 seconds just in between. And I had this sort of intuition that I needed to be in there. So we had moved from like the living room into our bedroom, and we have this sort of little built-in closet, and my husband like carried a chair in there, and he was just like standing there, and I was sitting in the chair having the contraction, and then I would go in the bed. And we just like, that was our little magical like bubble cave thing for literally several hours. We were just sort of like in the flow of it. And I also at this time started sort of spontaneously singing and like humming. It was kind of a ridiculous thing, but we had just seen Wicked. So Wicked had come out, the movie, or the, you know, the live action, weeks before. And I love this song Popular from Wicked that I had literally sang like as a high school child in my choir, my chorus class in high school. And so I know all the words. And for some reason, that song was just in my brain. And so for every contraction, I started humming like the intro to Popular from Wicked. And then Elena, eventually when they got there, they were just like stunned that I was singing. But that was kind of our ritual. Like I had read that there are things that you just spontaneously sort of start to do in your labor to get you through. And, you know, you never know what they're going to be until the day. And that was the thing that happened for me, was that I was humming. So those moments were really striking in terms of the birth, or in terms of the laboring. And then I think the other one was just this sense of like intensity, obviously, that starts to build as you get further in. And at a certain point, we realized, oh, this is like quite intense and we probably need them to come now. But for truly several hours, we had just been in our own world. He was timing them, how far apart they were. And I was just sort of doing my thing. And it was all through the middle of the night. So it's dark and cozy and just like warm. It's like all the things that they say you're quote unquote supposed to have for a birth to make it like, you know, the oxytocin flowing. And my husband will still say that he felt protective of that oxytocin. He learned in his class with the midwife that, you know, there's the triangle of hormones. And like, for some reason, that's the one image that sticks with him for the whole thing. And he knew it was his job to like protect that and to not let the adrenaline and the cortisol, like these things that can take over and can shift the way you physiologically react to your birth. And so that was so evident now. But yeah, in the moment, that was sort of his role. And I was just doing my thing. So those are the things that stand out until our team ended up coming a few hours later.
Speaking of which, Elena, would you like to pitch in here and just mention about, as a doula, when you arrive now into the scene, what's going on and what do you end up doing in that situation?
Great question. So there are different stages, right, that you enter into somebody's birth space. And like, regardless of what you see, unless you're literally, I mean, you know, knock on wood, it's only happened a couple of times, unless you arrive to a house and you literally see and hear that, there's some pushing happening. Actually, the first thing is just simply to gently enter the space and be really, really conscious in body, mind, soul, spirit, that you're entering into this oxytocin-rich environment and bubble that has been mother and baby and father. You don't want to interrupt too much. And that was also so nice to see, because actually by the time I arrived with Ellen, the midwife on duty had also arrived. And what was so amazing was to kind of arrive and hear Ellen humming and, you know, to just see her soft, pink, oxytocin-rich face. And also, it's okay, right, that I say Peter, Ellen, I think, I hope. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And also just like completely calm, also oxytocin, soft, rich face. And so I I observed very quickly like the constellation of the movement. And in this case, I just sat down in the doorway so that Ellen could see that I was there, but also sense that I was giving her space. So it's, as a doula, you're gently arriving, gently like letting them know you're there, and also not rushing in to do anything, because if you do something in that moment, there's subliminally, there can also be a message like, oh, maybe we weren't doing this quite right. And, 9.999 times out of 10, you're doing everything right because you've listened to what it is that, everybody's been telling you along the way. And actually, it's our job then to just stand back and then notice what we can add to what's happening, how we can support father, maybe, how we can support mother, sometimes even how we can just support the midwife and like what she's doing. Because sometimes that's super reassuring for people as well, that there's a little bit of activity and a sense of things getting ready. So that was what I was busy with at that moment. And I, also trying not to just kind of gleefully join in this beautiful humming that was happening. And also discreetly try to kind of capture the beauty of the moment that I'd landed in, because it was like that the oxytocin that Ellen describes was palpable. It was beautiful.
So something you said there is actually really a great point to highlight there is normally people kind of go, oh yeah, she gets the doula. But what you're saying there is everyone gets the doula. And so you're there to support the actual environment in itself. And it's not just, they say bridezilla, is it momzilla or something, where people are like, oh yeah, she wants whatever. But it's the fact that the doula is actually for the whole environment and experience in itself.
And that was so important to us too. And it's part of Elena's process, but that whole environment has been connected and woven together a bit before the day. So she even came and had a session with us at the midwife, and like people knew she was going to be part of this. So it was very intentional that way she was holding the space for everyone.
Beautiful. So can you share the actual moment of birth and what it was like for you, what you felt or what surprised you, and how was it to finally meet your baby?
Yes. Oh my gosh. So once our team was there, things moved quite quickly, which again is something that they don't always tell you will happen with your first baby in particular. So I realized pretty quickly that we weren't going anywhere. My plan had been to go to the birthing center. And when the midwife was able to finally do the first check on me, because it took her a little while to actually like get me laying down and comfortable, because I was just really in the throes of it. She said, you're 8 centimeters dilated. And I thought, okay, like that's really far. I knew that we were pretty close, but you never know. I hadn't had any internal exams to this point, so I had no clue. And so there was a moment of reckoning, pretty shortly before the birth happened, where we had just a realization that we are doing this here, right? And so there's just all this activity around us. My husband is running around, unpacking the birthing bag and getting all the stuff that you need for a home birth, which fortunately they send you in the mail and all the things, right? So we were okay, but it was just a flurry. And right around that same time as we made the decision, again, I think my body just subconsciously was sort of holding on a bit. We decided, okay, we're staying, we're not going anywhere. Even if we go somewhere, they're not going to give me any type of pain relief or, comfort measures. So I was like, what's the point of getting in a car? There's no way at this point. And just after that, probably within 15 minutes of that decision, maybe less, my water broke. And it hadn't broken to that point, obviously. So, that was sort of the next phase. But just around that same moment, maybe even like the contraction or two after, I felt immediately like I needed to push. Like I had that sensation that they say, oh, you'll feel it and you'll know maybe, and it really was true for me. Like I couldn't have denied it or stopped it if I wanted to. So that part became just quite intense very quickly. And in the process, I think, what happened was that my daughter's heart rate reacted to the swiftness and dropping down really quickly, and her heart rate went down. And so there was a little bit of a scare for a moment around like, is it going to stabilize the way it needs to? So the midwife, asked our permission. She said, I'd like to call the paramedics. I'd like to have them in the other room just in case, just as like a precaution. And I have to tell you, like, I wasn't even afraid in that moment. I was so in it and I trusted everybody so much that I was like, if that's what you think needs to happen, do it. I'd much rather they be here. Great. Like I was literally just like facing Elena against the wall, just sort of like going through. And then, of course, my husband had to run around and like get the paramedics inside. And so they popped their head in for a minute. But really, by the time they got there, everything had gone back to normal, as I recall. And so there wasn't even really a need for the birth itself for them to be there, other than just extra caution. But that was something that just, was suggested to us. So we thought, okay, let's do it. In the meantime, another midwife arrived because we were having the baby at the shift change. It was like 7 a.m. So we had two midwives. Our Kramzorg had also gotten a call because she wasn't planning to come to our house. We weren't planning to have a home birth. All these people are sort of like in our tiny little room, in our tiny little house. And yeah, I mean, it just happened very quickly. And I remember it a little bit, but I just feel like it's sort of a blur, the end, like the pushing. And I remember feeling like, okay, she's almost out. And then there all of a sudden she was on my chest. But I don't even really remember those moments as vividly as some people do, in the sense that like, I don't remember the first cry or being conscious of like, was she crying or wasn't she crying? I think I was just there was such a rush of hormones and everything else that happened that she was just on my chest. And I was like, okay, we did it. I was sort of just like, okay, this is a moment to just be here. I wasn't even really thinking about all those little bits, which I think everybody else was paying attention to. Yeah. And then we just had that sort of magical time where they were able to like clean us both up and check everything. And she was able to breastfeed and just have that like sort of golden hour in our bed, like in our house, which is so surreal.
Yeah. Is a home birth anything like what, everyone has so many different crazy thoughts in their head. I remember staying in my brother-in-law's house. They were away. We slept in their bed. And then it's like, oh, by the way, that bed, someone's died in it and someone was born in it. And you're kind of like, oh, how does it work when people give birth here? Is there a lot of blood? Like how is it? Is it an experience? I mean, not a lot of us are going to get it.
I mean, I think in some ways it's what you'd expect, right? Like there's a lot going on. There's a lot of people everywhere. There's stuff on the bed, but that's also what the krampakket is for. So I never felt like there was so much happening that it like couldn't be contained. Like I didn't ever have a sense that like, oh, this is such a mess, or, obviously people were tending to it and sort of cleaning it up around me. So I didn't have to think about anything. At one point they got me up within maybe an hour or two to get in the shower. And then I came back and like everything was flipped and like my sheets were changed and the Kramzorg was there. So I wasn't conscious of the messy part of it. Maybe the team was more aware. And my husband, I think, because he had to get all the stuff in the hot water bottle and the this and the that, right? But yeah, it just sort of happened. And I think part of because the system here is so set up for it, they all just knew how to interact in that way and what to ask each other and how to direct each other, that it never felt chaotic to me, if that makes sense.
So it was a fluid motion for everything.
As much as it possibly could have been without it being the plan, right? We had plan A, B, C, and D, and that was not any of them. So I think given that, yeah.
Elena, do you want to chime in here? Is that part of something with the doula as well? Is that something that you're kind of like, cleanliness obviously is a priority with hygiene with a baby as well. So is this something that's really a part of the structure for the midwives and the Kramzorg?
100%. And, that's always such an interesting thing about like the concept of what it is that a doula does. Because of course, like hygiene and cleanliness is, actually in the case of a home birth, it's a medical responsibility, right? But of course, doulas also support along the way. And I think, that's like when we look at the concept of home birth, like if we zoom right out and just press pause on Ellen's beautiful story a second, like, we think about home birth from an international lens, and because we're so conditioned to imagine that birth is going to happen in hospital, it's almost that thought of, yeah, but how can it happen at home? What about the hospital bed? What about the IV line? And the thing is, so much of that just isn't necessary. So, it's really beautiful to hear today that like Ellen wasn't conscious of us like just gently tidying along as we went along. I'm sure it's different for many doulas. Like I've done this almost 12 years. So I've, had the privilege and honor of being at many home births, and we just all get along and help one another along. And I do think one of the really powerful aspects of Ellen's birth is that it's such a beautiful, powerful example of how home birth is so safe and so well structured in this country And, I love that, like, the aspect of the paramedics popping by is just not a big deal for Ellen, because the midwives did such a good job of staying calm. My face also, I know we spoke last week, Ellen, like, you saw from my face that it seemed like a good idea that they would come, but I wasn't worried one little bit, because we saw what happened. The waters broke and your baby just shot down the birth canal. And, of course, that's pretty shocking, right? But, from outside, that immense threshold that Ellen was in as she gave birth to her baby, she gave birth and then there was baby on her chest. And, of course, it's super shocking after that final part is so fast. But, in the background, one of the paramedics, I could hear him tread gently down the hallway and just gently ask one of the midwives, everything okay, baby doing fine? And they were like, yeah, she's great. And then they were like, now, gefeliciteerd, da 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 da. And then they just exited, went down the stairs like early morning that Christmassy day, and went along the merry way to help out, and whoever else they went on to help. So it's such an amazing example of how the maternal healthcare possibilities in this country are truly second to none.
Thank you, Elena. That's actually really interesting. And it's actually so wonderful to hear the support that the paramedics are given, but also with ease. There's no stress with it. So that's great to hear. Ellen, looking back now, how has sharing your birth story, either here today, previously with Elena, in your catch up with her, or equally your friends and your family, helped you process and make meaning of your experience?
It's such a multifaceted answer, I think. First of all, just the chance to share it here is so meaningful to me in multiple ways as well, because my daughter is almost 9 months. So it's sort of like this very full circle moment of like, we had all of our preparation, we had our pregnancy, and now she's been here like about as long as she was inside me, all those things, right? So just to revisit it at this moment is really special, because it's so easy to get into the flow of life and into parenting, right? I reflected recently that I haven't had a lot of chance to slow down since she's come and actually sit with how this was for me and how it feels now, right? I have my in the moment memories, but it's so special and just reconfirming of all the things that we talked about, to hear it and to sort of feel it in my bones and to see it reflected from both of you, and to share it with Elena. I think it makes it feel so much more solid and real, I guess, because it is kind of a surreal experience. And everybody has such a different one that sometimes when you hear other people's, you're thinking like, did that really happen to me? Like, did it really happen that way? What? I'm sure that must have, and you sort of get jumbled up a bit. And so I think in the chance to just say it out loud, it has been really powerful for me, and just taking that on as part of my own history. And I think it, to come back to what we were saying at the beginning around like building self-trust, like to share and reflect on this story also reinforces to me how much trust I had in my body during that whole experience, especially in the moment of birth, which was so unexpected. Birth is always unexpected, right? But mine was so swift. And yet, because of that trust and the work that had been done prior, like in myself, with my team, I really was able to meet that moment, as they say in yoga. And that is so striking to hear and to process. It's one of those things that you sort of aspire toward, but you don't know if you'll do it. And I had hoped that my birth would be positive, quote unquote positive. And I listened to many stories and tried to find those nuggets to like reinforce that like I could have an experience that felt like this, but then to actually have it, and then to be able to look back and say, oh, that was really real. And you did that. And there were so many things that came around you to make that possible, as well as a healthy dose of luck, I'm sure, in the universe. Yeah, it's really magic to kind of look back. And it does just make me so grateful that we are here, and that this landscape for birth and the trust that it puts in birth and in birthing people and partners is second to none in my experience. And I know deeply that this is such a different experience than I would have had I been in my home country. And that is also just a really big part of this too, to see the possibilities of birth and to and to know what my body is truly capable of doing, that it was made for this. You know, I was told that when we first started the journey, that like your body was made to do this and your body knows how to birth, right? And there are, of course, reasons why that becomes challenging along the way for many people, right? But in my case, I was able to actually live that like my body knew what to do and it did what it needed to do. And my daughter was born and healthy, and it all worked out, which was just, yeah, really, really striking as a sort of lesson for me on my journey of trust.
That sounds wonderful. Elena, have you any last few words that you want to mention here about the doula process, about the part that you play in supporting pregnancy and birth here in the Netherlands?
Yeah, it's interesting because I do notice in myself, like there's a reticence because I'm like, my whole body as we talk about Ellen's birth story is like alive with oxytocin and it's tingling. So I also want to be really careful here that like I don't spoil that feeling because it is such an honor to join any family in birth. And Ellen and Peter and I, like we've got this long-standing relationship, and I think part of the reason that I have such a strong oxytocin reaction is also that I actually wish that I could work with all of the families that I work with in this way, that I could meet them before they conceive, that I could meet them and work with them throughout their kind of fertility journey and support them in kind of consciously connecting to these deep inner shifts that are happening as the process of matrescence is, you know, bubbling and boiling away inside, deep inside. And I think if I like keep it specific to Ellen, because I also don't want to do too much of like a sales job about doulas, but like Ellen's story is such a powerful one because, you know, yes, she knew a lot, but she had this really strong intuition that it was an inner journey too. So she took this really beautiful and dedicated approach to satisfying her intellectual need to know and understand, but also simultaneously took this, you know, mind-blowing threshold chapter of her life while she was pregnant and just before she was pregnant and preparing for birth and then birth, to also deeply dive into her body and examine some of the narratives that she was holding in her body that she recognized might hold her back, to really take time to confront those head on with different people in different senses and choose trust and faith. That's like the honor, my honor alongside her in this case, that I got to support her and love on her and hold her unconditionally as she looked at all of that. And it's so, God, I hope I don't choke up, but it's so meaningful to hear that somebody then say, like, even in that deep hiccup stage where it looks like, oh my gosh, like, what if I step inside these walls of the hospital and everything else like disappears? It's so meaningful for me to hear today. Like, I knew that even if that was the case, that we had everything we need and we had the team that we needed and we had Elena by our side to support us in making the best of that scenario. And essentially that's what a doula does. And that's the difficult thing. If you do look at like a sales pitch around what it is that a doula does, like it is different every time. I also have to say, I do know that there are some doulas out there who, for whatever reason, maybe they don't have the experience or the desire to kind of hold that full birth and exploration of matrescence and that full chapter work. Like some doulas really are just doing like a session or two in pregnancy to kind of get to know the person. And then they go on call at 37 weeks and then they attend birth. And then somewhere in the first 3 weeks, they do a postpartum session and bring some soup and then they say goodbye. I haven't practiced like that. You know, I've practiced for almost 12 years and I haven't practiced like that for 10 years. And in fact, like my support offerings just kind of get longer and longer. And, you know, I love that. Yeah. The other thing I do want to touch on, if I may, is this concept of birth stories. Like I really loved your question about how to reflect on what a birth story means and what it means to share a birth story. And one of the things that I do always really like to share with people in our last session together is really like a birth story is a living story. It lives in your bones. It lives in your womb. It lives in your endocrine system. It lives in your heart. And your soul holds this story sometimes like a lead weight and sometimes like the ultimate like story and heroine's journey of cosmic awareness and this concept of oneness. I do think there's so much power in sharing stories, and sometimes that's also what doulas do. I do work, for example, in listening to people share their birth stories and reconciling with their birth stories when it's been more difficult. And sometimes in kind of creatively brainstorming, like, how do you hold this? How do you share this? How do you take this living story that you're, ecstatic about and help it be a template for another challenge you're facing in your life or in your journey of matrescence or in your life as a mother. And I just think it's really beautiful that you're busy inviting people to share these stories. And I want to encourage anybody listening to this to, in the aftermath of this lovely episode with Ellen, like, spend some time thinking about your living story, like your living birth story and what that's meant for your stories about your body, about your womanhood, about your motherhood, about your daughterhood, about your story of origin, because it's powerful medicine. It's powerful stuff.
Absolutely, 100% agree with you on all of that. And as Ellen said, she was able to advocate for herself, to be able to speak up, to question the medical side of things, saying, I want to take a step back. I want to try and do this at home, because she knew that. And she had already been there and she had spoken with people. She had done the courses and she knew what right she had. And she was also very much in contact with what she was able to do because she knew the strengths that she had within her. So thank you for both joining me. Ellen, I really appreciate you reaching out to actually ask to say, hey, let me share my birth story, because it's been really magical. And it's also so wonderful to hear that you had such a magical, deeply wonderful experience. And the fact that you also got to do it with Elena, which I'm purely jealous of. Thank you so much for the two of you for joining. That's going to be a cozy wrap on today's episode of Damn Parenting. I do want to say, again, a heartfelt thank you to Ellen for your openness, your honesty, and for trusting me with such a personal and powerful story to share with our community here. It takes courage to share something so close to your heart, and we're honored you chose to share it here on Damn Parenting. So a very big thank you also to the very familiar face, Elena, as well, not only for walking alongside Ellen on her journey and as her doula during the birth, but also for being here today to share your wisdom and your perspective with all of us. If today's conversation resonated with you, remember, you're not alone. Birth stories connect us. They remind us that every experience, no matter how it unfolds, is valid, and they show us the strength in sharing. Make sure to hit follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode of Damn Parenting. This is the parenting podcast for us English-speaking parents here in the Netherlands. Share this episode with a friend who's pregnant, planning their birth, or who just really simply loves real parenting stories. And also come on over, say hi to Instagram, or also just visit us on Damn Parenting on Spotify, where you can actually chat with us now. Yep, new function I have to figure out. So thank you all again. Ellen, thank you so much. Elena, thank you so much. And to you listening, thank you also so much. We're all part of this village together. Till next time.